We now move to First Minister's question time. Question number 1, Johann Lamont.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what engagements he has planned for the rest of the day.
First Minister.
Meetings to take forward the Government's programme for Scotland.
Johann Lamont.
Thank you. Presiding Officer, last week's unemployment figures revealed that more jobs are being lost in Scotland than in any other part of the United Kingdom. This week, we were presented with more grim forecasts for the construction and retail sectors in Scotland. The First Minister needs to realise that this is about real people and real jobs. The First Minister's Plan McBee, the one he boasted about to all who would listen, has clearly 1 in 3 of all the jobs lost in the United Kingdom in the last 3 months were Scottish jobs.
First Minister.
Well, the unemployment problem in Scotland, indeed across these islands, is extremely serious. Of that, there is no question whatsoever. I think Johann Lamont, in fairness, should remember that the employment rate, that's the percentage of people employed in the economy, is significantly higher in Scotland than any other country in these islands, and the inactivity rate, that's the people who are not in the labour market, is much lower. And these are good things about the job market. But the recession and the slow recovery is impacting on the lives of families in Scotland and across these islands. And therefore, shouldn't we turn our attention to what can be done about it in terms of the UK budget which is coming up, both in terms of increasing capital spending, which has been demonstrated as a rapid and effective way of getting people back to work, and also in increasing the funding to small and medium-sized businesses, the great drivers of employment in the economy, where we now know that Merlin as an operation has refused to deliver the full goods that was promised. So let's turn our attention to what can be done. That's what the Scottish Government is doing, and I suggest that all people in this chamber act constructively and do the same. Yeah.
Johann Lamont.
As ever, of course, the First Minister focuses on other people's responsibilities and not his own. Indeed, his own budget for jobs and growth could be done under the Trades Description Act, never mind talk about the budget at UK level. Last week, the number of young people unemployed broke the 100,000 mark, and that is unacceptable. What was the First Minister's response? He had nothing to say. Perhaps he was much too busy falling out with his old pal Donald Trump, falling in with Twitter fan Rupert Murdoch, and arguing with the Prime Minister about who knows best how to run a referendum. All the while, more and more young people are being shut out of the job market with the long-term consequences we should all fear. To coin a phrase, from the very man who launched a consultation document in a castle, when is he going to put people before prestige?
First Minister.
The position on position on youth unemployment is again extremely serious, which is why, of course, that this government has appointed a Minister for Youth Employment, which is why we are bringing forward initiatives like 125,000 modern apprenticeships over the next 5 years, some 60% higher than the level of modern apprenticeships that we inherited. And of course, every modern apprentice in Scotland has a job, a critical and important fact of the modern apprenticeship system in Scotland. And also why this, above all, that we are offering a guarantee to every 16 to 19-year-old in Scotland who's not in education or training or in a job or a modern apprenticeship, that they will have a training or education opportunity. That, to me, is very substantive action indeed to tackle the issue before us. We had, just a couple of weeks ago, a forum for youth employment in Scotland. That united the unions, the employers, a whole variety of people in the voluntary sector and indeed the other political parties. And people united to drive against the evil of youth unemployment and the prospect of seeing a lost generation as was seen in the 1980s. That was the joint, signed-up effort of everybody at that substantial forum. All I would ask Johann Lamont to think about is whether she can take the good wishes and goodwill that was expressed on a cross-party basis in that forum into this chamber and demonstrate to Scotland that every party, that every MSP is committed to fight the evil of youth unemployment.
we support all of those across the country who want something done, we want the First Minister to get on and do those things that need to be done, because the reality is it's not working. He talks about his new Minister for Employment. Well, that's one job for one woman. But what about the other 399 women who are losing their jobs every day under the SNP government? Because although the First Minister talks about it, despite the promise made by the First Minister at the election to protect public service workers, nearly 24,000 people delivering public services lost their jobs last year. It was the First Minister who chose to pass on 89% of the cuts to local government, and it was therefore inevitable that women would bear the brunt of those cuts. Female unemployment is at its highest since records began. Why has the First Minister broken his promise to protect these public sector jobs?
First Minister.
Two or three things about Labour's approach to these matters. If I remember correctly, Labour demanded in this chamber the appointment of a Minister for Youth Employment. Now, what is the point of demanding something in this chamber and then deriding it once that initiative is taken? It's also the case that Labour voted against having 25,000 modern apprenticeships in Scottish society. And it's also the case that 2 weeks ago voted against the increased capital spending in John Swinney's budget presented to this chamber. But in terms of Labour calling for action, Labour have, of course, the 5-point plan for growth, 4 of which are issues for the United Kingdom Government. 4 out of 5 of Labour's plan for growth are issues for the United Kingdom Government. So how on earth does Johann Lamont say we shouldn't be calling on the UK Government to do things when that is what Labour's plan itself is? And finally, on the extraordinarily serious issue of women employment in the workforce, we should remember again that female employment in Scotland is higher than elsewhere in these islands. But let me tell Johann Lamont what we're doing about trying to make sure that women in our workforce are given their equal and proper status. In 2008-9, there were 2,857 young women went into modern apprenticeships. That was 27% of the total of modern apprenticeships. 2 years later, 2010-11, in a much, much larger group of modern apprenticeships, 9,656 young women went into modern apprenticeships, almost 45% of modern apprenticeships. Now, I'd like to see that figure even higher, incidentally, but it ill behoves a party who had a low number of modern apprenticeships and a minute percentage of women entering the modern apprenticeship to criticise a party which has increased the modern apprenticeships by some 60%. And the number of young women taking that life opportunity by fully 20%. So let us see if Johann Lamont has the grace to welcome that substantial improvement in female participation in this workforce.
Johann Lamont.
I mean, just breathtaking complacency on behalf of the First Minister. In the face of unemployment figures that must make our blood run cold to suggest, find figures and suggest that everything is okay. Because in reality is, on the very day that these shocking unemployment figures were released, the First Minister was giving a lecture in London about separation. Rather than lecture people in England, maybe he could take advice and listen for a change to a Labour government in Wales, and indeed those in other parts of the United Kingdom, where the figures have got better, not worse. In Scotland, unemployment heads towards a 250,000 mark, all on the First Minister's watch. Instead of focusing all of his energies on running a referendum campaign, when will the First Minister get on with the job of running the country and addressing people's real concerns?
First Minister.
Well, I asked if Johann Lamont would have the grace to acknowledge a huge improvement in young women entering the workforce. Perhaps that wasn't a question that deserved to be asked on account of the fact that the answer was pretty obvious. Now, she mentioned Wales. I'm not certain that that's the strongest suit for Johann Lamont to go down. Unemployment in Wales is currently 9%, which is very high compared to the 8.6% in Scotland. Over the last year, it's gone up by 0.7% compared to 0.6% in Scotland. The unemployment situation in Wales and Scotland is very serious. It's slightly worse in Wales than it is in Scotland, which is why the First Minister of Wales and myself have called jointly for the action from the UK Government that we both realise is necessary in order to address this crisis of employment. And what are one of the keys to addressing it is to do exactly what this government was able to do 2 years ago in bringing forward capital investments. As yet, the Conservative Party have adopted the Labour Party's capital budget, the one left to them by Alistair Darling. Deeper and tougher cuts, remember, than those of Margaret Thatcher. But last week there was a chink of light. In the middle of the discussions with the Prime Minister, I said, look, urgent capital investment, the way forward to drive forward the economy at this particular moment, not in 2 or 3 years' time, but at this particular moment. The Prime Minister asked for us to submit a list of shovel-ready capital projects for their consideration. That's exactly what we are going to do. And I hope when that list of building new schools, hospitals, roads and repair budget is put forward, we'll at least have the support of the Labour Party for the initiative to try and break the stranglehold of Westminster Government over the capital budget of Scotland.
Question number 2, Ruth David.